Dr. Galloway and Dr. Fortenberry, good friends, all educators of the most important young people in our country, those who will lead and build it over the rest of our lifetimes and beyond. Welcome to our state. Welcome on behalf of Purdue University. It's been a joyful and a thrilling opportunity for me to become at least tangentially associated with you and your colleagues at our great university. And it's been a change of gears, but I've been through that before. No one was more surprised than I when the opportunity came, unless it was the wife of a good friend in New York City I like to tell about. He went home that day and said, "Joni, did you hear the news about Mitch?" And she said, "Well, no." And he said, "Yeah, he's going to be the president of Purdue." She said, "That is just terrible." He said, "No, I think it's kind of cool." "What?" She said, "His talents will be completely wasted in the chicken business." So not everybody knows what you know about our school, but we're working on that. I get asked all the time, people say, "Gosh, business, the government, the higher ed, what's the difference?" And I said, in the last job, it was dog eat dog, but here it's just the opposite. So one of my friends sent me this list of things. He said, "You're going to need a new sense of humor now, you're hanging around with all these intellectuals." He said, "Here's a list of jokes only people in higher education could appreciate." And it was things like, "Entropy ain't what it used to be." And my favorite was said that a classics professor walked in a bar and said, "I'd like a very dry vodka Martinez, please." And the bartender says, "Oh, no, you mean a martini?" He said, "If I wanted a double, I'd have asked for one." So, but I am adjusting, and happily so, and I'm really very, very seriously, it's privileged at the opportunity to say just a few words to you today. It's not just ceremonial from my vantage point, because what you do, the careers you have chosen are very, very central to the choice I made to go to Purdue. It was very much an animating and motivating factor in that decision to try to play some small role in encouraging the teaching and the production of the engineers and other STEM experts on whom our national success, so much of it will depend in a high-tech world. Life brings so many little coincidences, and here was just another one. So last Friday, I had a very similar talk. Group wasn't quite this big, but they were equally impressive in their own way. These were leaders of the industry, which is innovating in bioengineering the crops that will be necessary, the new breeds, the new foodstuffs that will be necessary for somebody to invent if we're going to feed 9 billion people 3 decades from now. And I said to them that they represented a significant piece of the reason Purdue exists. The genius of Abe Lincoln and Congressman Morrill and their allies in the 1860s and 70s to press and persevere until they achieved the Morrill Act that gave birth to the land-grant universities of this country continues to pay a great, great dividend every generation. And why were land-grant schools placed in this country by those far-sighted people? Well, they were very explicit. Of course, first of all, it was to open the doors of higher education to the masses and to move it beyond the elites who had been almost exclusively its students up to that point. But then beyond that, they said these universities ought to specialize in teaching agriculture and the mechanic arts. Well, the definitions of both those disciplines or families of disciplines have certainly evolved over time, but when were they ever more important than now? So Friday, I'm speaking to those people who are at the very a vanguard of the technologies necessary to feed a hungry world. And today I get the opportunity to spend a few moments with those of you who are similarly in the vanguard of the dazzling array of technologies that are the heirs to the mechanic arts that Morrill and his colleagues were talking about. And so how fitting it feels that a person with an assignment to try to help one of the universities that is carrying on that tradition gets a chance to say thanks to you, and so I do. You know, this is no surprise to anyone in this audience. This is a time of such incredible challenge in higher education. I guess I would say that is another attraction to me. We have our struggles in this country, but it is commonly accepted that we still have the finest system of higher education in the world. And there's no asset that any nation would rather have these days in a world driven increasingly by technological innovation than the kind of system we have. And yet it's facing criticisms, and it's facing attacks and challenges and new competitors in a way it never has before. We're hearing questions no one asked until maybe the last 8 or 10 years. Are too many kids going to college? Are they learning anything real while they're there? What's a diploma mean? It seems like everybody gets something close to an A. And underlying all this, why does it all cost so doggone much? President Reagan used to like the story of the Blitz victim in wartime London. Firefighters are rushing around after an attack. They go into a house. There's an elderly lady, semi-conscious in some rubble. And as they're lifting her out from under the stairs where she's lying, a bottle of brandy falls out. And they said, "Hey, ma'am, perhaps a little taste of this help revive you." She said, No, leave that there. That's for emergencies." Well, I don't know if we're in an emergency at this point, but we are at a time of testing and a time of unusual difficulty for higher ed. And at Purdue, and I'm sure at your schools too, we are wrestling with these questions. We're convinced they can be decisively answered, but going to take a little action and probably some innovation of our own. Innovation of the kind that is going on, I see now, in engineering education as in very few other places. So we are having a hard look at what we teach and how we teach it and to whom we teach it. We're trying to deal with the latter by being very careful about the cost of a Purdue education. After 36 consecutive years of increases, we froze tuition for the year that just finished, and it'll be frozen next year. And we've already announced it'll be frozen the year after that. And I don't know how much further we can go, but we have said to ourselves, to our students, their families, to the state that supports us, we've said we're going to do our level best now, not to ask or demand that families adjust their budgets to ours. We're going to see what we can do to adjust our spending to their budgets. In terms of how we teach, we are trying both to develop and to plagiarize wherever we find good ideas, new modes of teaching that are well suited to the disciplines of today and the students of today. We have transformed, as far as we can tell, more of our courses into some variety of the spectrum of so-called hybrid teaching than any other school, and we're determined to both push that out in terms of its numbers and the sophistication with which we do it. But in terms of what we teach, we've made, I would say, a renewed commitment at Purdue, specifically to engineering, and also to certain related disciplines. We already produce, numerically, more STEM graduates than any other American university. We already are more concentrated than all but two in terms of the percentage of STEM degrees awarded, engineering being by far the largest piece of that, to the total. We have committed ourselves to two-chapter expansion of our engineering college. Our fantastic dean, Leah Jameson, is already leading. We are all well into the second year of an expansion that will grow us by 700 to 800 undergrads, 700 to 800 graduate students, well over 100 new net faculty with facilities to match. And we have already asked Leah and her colleagues to begin thinking beyond that time horizon about the size, scope, and nature of a second such expansion. We simply believe that there is no more essential mission, no prouder mission that we could be pursuing at our university than production of new engineers of the finest preparation possible. You know, of all the things we teach, nothing is more needed or more valuable. It is part, obviously, of our historic mission, but it is also a remarkable opportunity in the world with the information age to which we've entered. You know, it's been a long time now since the first ratios and dreary statistics began appearing. We've all read them, probably back to the days of, certainly back to the 70s, ratio, you know, Japan, 100 engineers per law year, US, that's more or less the reciprocal. Very, very disquieting. Now people like to talk about the absolute numbers of engineers being produced in China and India and other places. Yes, they and their young people see the centrality of these skills to individual success and to societal success. My friend Norm Augustine led a commission, still the most oft-cited data point, I guess, in this area. They concluded that in round numbers, America needs at least 10,000 more engineers per year to maintain its international competitiveness. And just as important as that, to maintain the sense of opportunity and hope and upward mobility that's always been the unifying factor in this country. I don't want to drift off into a more metaphysical discussion here, but we ought to all be paying attention to the very rapid change in data about people's belief in upward mobility and what we call the American dream, and their belief that their children will live better than they did. All come undone in the last very few years, and there's no single contribution anybody could make to restoring greater growth and opportunity and that engine that's kept us all together as a society, as a free society, than what you do and you and your colleagues in similar disciplines. So, just to talk for a minute about how that can best be pursued. Now, as higher ed has come under new scrutiny, one of the most frequently criticized phenomena is the very low rate at which students who enter college complete college. I have to confess to you that I'd been off in business and doing other things, was not more than an attentive citizen to higher ed until I got into the last job where I was engaged with higher education on a more direct basis. I thought it was a typo. The first time one of our presidents, I think it was the president of Purdue at the time, had told me what the rate of completion was. And then when I found out that that rate in the low 60s wasn't the 4 years I was familiar with, but 6. I just could never help but think, some of you may have had this experience, if I had said to my dad, "Dad, I got a great idea. I think I want to stick around college for another year," he'd have said, "I'm all for you, and tell me when you get work, because, you know, I'm not paying for it." That world, of course, is long gone. But if completion, which we and every other school I know are now really working on, if schools have begun to realize that that's unacceptable and that it is their assignment, the students primarily, of course, but it's the school's assignment also to find ways to help students succeed. Well, none too soon. Now, this mentality, we hope, is taking deep root at Purdue, and I hope at each of your universities too. there are a lot of Purdue grads in this audience. Any audience I go to on the subject of engineering, but always Boilermakers there. And I'll bet if we stood them up here on the stage, at least 2 out of 3 would tell you the same story. It's the old left and right story where the professor said, look both directions and you won't all be here. Sort of a weed out mentality. And that has got to go. And I think is basically under Leah's leadership and those of our other, and the rest of our colleges as well, has got to give way, we believe, to an ethic that says we're going to maintain rigor. I'll come back to that in a second. But we accept a duty to improve the methods of teaching, to improve the personalization of teaching, and ultimately to improve the success rate of teaching. That it's a metric of our performance as much as it is that students. Now at Purdue, and I hope this is true where you live, this must not, of course, especially not in a field like engineering, must not come by the easing, greater success rates cannot come by the easing of standards. Before I took the job, one of the most attractive pieces of data I came across, I sort of scoured around a little, had to do with the phenomenon we know as grade inflation. And there's a database that's built up now over quite a long time, and it shows how various schools have gone, what the average grades have been. They barely moved at Purdue University in 30 or 40 years. The average grade is still a little under 2.9, grade point average. And we want to preserve that. I tell our freshmen, I'll do it again in August when the new class gets there, if you didn't notice this, you have come to a tough school, congratulations. When you emerge from here with a degree in engineering or any subject, the world will know you earned it, that you must have learned something while you were there. And yet, we cannot tolerate low rates of success and completion, let alone a mentality that says, some of you won't make it, and that's just the way of the world. It's a different and exhilarating time in higher ed, isn't it? I now tell our students, look to your left and right in our engineering college. Look to your left and right. One of you is going to be, at least one's going to be a woman. And on the other side, odds are, someone from a different country. It's a marvelous opportunity that we have, and I know that you have. So, at Purdue, a point of great pride for us is that 10 years ago, we became the first school, first university, to start a department of engineering education. As far as I know, it is the largest, I think 23, I believe, faculty at the present time. Happy to tell you, by the way, more than half of those are women. And under the leadership of David Radcliffe, with the, I know, daily encouragement of his dean, they are working very, very hard, as I know this audience is, to identify the ways in which, the best ways in which this most difficult set of skills and learning can occur. The best ways to make sure that people who are great researchers are also great teachers, which David reminds me cannot be taken for granted. At our place, they have got the rate of retention for engineering students now up to, from freshman to sophomore year, up to 93%. A big jump from just a few years ago, and you know, the goal, of course, is higher than that. And so I just want to say to each of you how much, just as a citizen, I appreciate, and I hope, and I think all attentive citizens do, the work that you do. I cannot name a single pursuit that can have greater positive value for state, nation, and world than what you do. And the fact that you're convened here and working on an everyday basis back home to find ways to help that next marginal student, 2 and 3 and 4, who might not have made it to succeed, do so, is just, to me, is just a very noble pursuit. You know, the simple fact is we have to get the yield of this process up, because our nation, our world needs every single one of your students. Now, let me just close with a sort of footnote reflection. I had a great opportunity to address the National Academy of Engineering last fall. And I said at that time, I took cognizance of the fact there are some people, you've read some articles too, who challenge this notion that we really need all these new engineers and all these new STEM graduates. And they produce some data that suggests that many STEM graduates don't find their way into STEM vocations. Well, I read the data from Norm Augustine's commission and so many other places a different way. I don't think we can get enough. And I think engineers, by the nature of what you are so good at doing, create new opportunities for themselves and for so many other people through their innovations and their improvements and their constant re-engineering of the world in which we live. But I would say that if the skeptics are right, then I don't care. I still want all the engineers you can teach, because the mindset that you bring to life, not just to work, but I trust to your outlook on other questions, I think is so valuable and so needed. You know, this has always been a can-do society. We began as a nation of tinkerers and inventors. I pointed out to our commencement audience just a month or so ago, to our students, that it wasn't until Faraday that scientific research began to be the source of new inventions. Up to that point, it had been creative, whatever they called themselves, engineers, constantly figuring out the next best thing, the next improvement. And so, for starters, this nation can use all the people who think about the world that way, lest we become a fearful and a timid and eventually then a less progressive society. We need to be a society that doesn't approach every question with a so-called precautionary mindset, but rather that says, oh my goodness, let's make a list of all the things that could go wrong. But rather a society that continues to say, let's figure out what might go wrong and fix it in advance. You know, how can we make this work? I think that's the way in which you and those you teach are more likely to think. And also to be able to make the common sense calculations that engineers have to make with great precision all the time between risk and benefit and tolerances, and it's keeping the inevitable trade-offs of life in some fair perspective. So I say that even if many of your students go on to live lives in other pursuits than the ones they specifically prepared for, just in those other jobs and as citizens, they can play such an important role in maintaining and then building the America that our children deserve and that the world needs. Thank you for the work you do and for this chance to pay a little bit of tribute to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for a thoughtful and thought-provoking presentation this morning. President Daniels is willing to take a few questions. If you have a question, there are microphones in the aisle. Please go to one of the microphones so that we can all hear your question. Are there no questions?
I'm gonna make an escape. That's good. Here's one, maybe.
Yes.
Is the microphone? Okay, I think you can hear me. Every year, my university turns away about 95% of the students who are qualified for admission. What can we do in the university system to allow us to have more people coming into the system in the future?
Yes, everyone heard, I trust. I think this is an excellent question. I say life's little coincidences. So my new friend, who I spent a fair amount of time communicating with now, Michael Crow, out at Arizona State University, it says all the time, and I think that at least schools like ours should adopt it. Let's be known not by who we turn away, but by how many we manage to include. To which I would add, and he would too, not only to admit, but to successfully graduate, as we were just discussing. And this is part of the reason that we are growing at Purdue. This is part of the reason we are going to work as hard as we can to keep the cost affordable to more students. And we all know some of the reasons that higher ed, or parts of it, have drifted into a mentality of exclusion. Some ratings, for instance, are enhanced by greater, as it's called, selectivity. But I hope that's changing, and I take heart from your question. I hope you'll ask it at your own school too. I think it's absolutely essential that we recognize that the opportunity for a better life that America's always offered now depends in a way it did not till the last generation or two on a first-rate education. And we all must not only keep the doors open or make sure the doors are open to the maximum number of students, but then make sure that the maximum number of them successfully fulfill their potential and come out the other end.
Question here on the right.
I'm Kanti Prasad from University of Massachusetts Lowell. This is absolutely our goal, to get 90% graduation rate by the administration goal. But the standards they are raising every year, admission standards. I want to find out at Purdue, you said you met 93% goal. Did you raise your standards, admission standard, or did you dilute your admission standards, like SAT and high school GPA?
Yes, I think I captured it. The question is about our admission standards. I can tell you that the average, as they say, profile of our students, and specifically our engineering students, keeps going up and up and up. It's one reason we want to grow our numbers, and that Lee is leading us that way. And I'm convinced that we are forced to turn down, just for space reasons, capacity reasons, a great number of students who could, especially with the benefit of the most thoughtful and scientific engineering education, could succeed. And so absolutely we hope to do that. Back to the previous question for a second. In the world of what I think are false standards, false ratings, I should say, bogus ratings with which we've lived, I won't name any former news magazines that produce them. Wouldn't be polite. But another thing that boosts one's ratings is the so-called is selectivity, and is the average profile, therefore, that comes in. So there's a virtue in that, because we all want to be more confident of the success of our students. But I have said first to our faculty and to our admissions people that it needs to be a consequence of the excellence of Purdue, not a conscious strategy, at least at this point. I think the standards, the average profile of the students coming to our school has gone up very dramatically over recent years. It's at Pancake House yesterday morning out on a motorcycle ride and heard it for the 1,000th time. Stopped by a booth. There's a young woman there. She thinks she wants to come to Purdue, maybe study engineering. Her mom says, you know, it's really hard to get in there these days. And I like hearing that in one respect. On the other hand, it tells me, you know, let's not go so far that we cost ourselves the chance to educate some young woman or man who could be a great engineer one day. So we're working on it. You know, I didn't take your time with it this morning, but another part of the answer to the challenge in higher education has got to be greater accountability. Just as accountability finally had to come and is beginning to come to the K-12 system, where we're finally demanding some performance and measurement, more careful measurement of it, so too with the world in which we live. And we worked with the Gallup organization, and just a month or two ago, you may have seen the release of the first Gallup-Purdue, it's called Gallup-Purdue Index, by far the biggest study of college graduates ever undertaken, 30,000 is the N. And there'll be a series of reports as we try to learn what worked. Those who are successful, not just financially, by the way, but in multiple domains of well-being, as defined by Gallup through its decades of work in this area. Those who are very successful and thriving in life, what can we learn about the college experiences that they had and learn to do more of? I'll tell you from the very first report, by the way, none of this will, so far, will surprise you, except possibly by degree. An incredibly powerful correlate of overall success later was I had at least one professor who spent personal time, took a personal interest in my success. And a second one, very, I think, again, logical, based on the long-time practice of engineering, but again, it separated so far from other factors, was I had at least one project that lasted a full term or more as part of my education. Similarly, I had at least one internship, or we would say co-op type experience, that lasted a term or more. So we're going to try to learn everything we can about how to, again, raise our batting average, raise the percentage not only who stay for a second year, but come out the other end, and I know you're working hard on it too.
Question here on the left.
David Zietlow with Bradley University. I have a question about, do you see any reform in the tenure and promotion procedure to better reward educators?
Well, David, I don't know. I'll just say that I think this is one. I'm glad our faculty is reviewing its tenure and promotion policy. There are some aspects of it that I hear over and over from faculty that possibly need improvement. The two that I hear most commonly, or two of them, especially candidates for tenure, worry that interdisciplinary work will not be adequately recognized or might even be seen as time not well spent. Similarly, those who are interested in entrepreneurism or in taking the products of their research more directly out into the world are concerned that that is not adequately recognized. And I think those kinds of concerns deserve a lot of attention. You know, I haven't had a chance to study it yet, but just within the last couple of days, someone emailed to me a new study, apparently very carefully done by people at one of our most highly regarded universities, that has attempted to compare the teaching of tenured and non-tenured faculty, and it was not friendly to the tenured cohort. So these questions are arising more often than not. It is not at the top of our list. We have a new provost coming, and he's an engineer. You would be maybe not surprised, but you should know. And I'm very excited about his joining us, and we sat down last week, and the to-do list that he and I have to work on together is very long. Other than encouraging that our T&P policy be reviewed and then given some teeth. It's one thing to have a policy that maybe makes some reforms. It's another to see it actually implemented college by college, department by department. I'm learning how that cannot be taken for granted. So,
Question right here in the middle.
Thank you. Atsushi Akira, Rensselaer Polytechnic. So how do you think the United States should respond to the way that Europe is implementing the Bologna process? So in other words, because they've embraced the 3+2 model, we're at a stage where Europe is potentially going to make the master's degree the standard degree for engineering. It's been a target that we've always wanted to do, in engineering education, but have found very difficult to implement here in the United States.
yeah, this is a great question, and it will prompt me to go read a little and ask some questions about it. So I don't think I can give you a complete answer, but I hope this is somewhat responsive. It's not just in engineering that in Europe, 3-year bachelor degrees are perhaps as much the rule as the exception. Anyway, they're much more common than here, and that has not escaped the notice of many people who are scrutinizing the American system. And at the beginning of this year, I offered a bounty, a reward, actually 2 of them, to whichever department. We've got to make this choice very soon now. First came up with 2 new things. One was a competency-based degree, so one in which a student progresses at his or her own rate, is not locked to the semester calendar. You're seeing this spreading in a variety of ways, and many of the online offerings that are coming into play these days operate on a competency basis. But the other one was a 3-year degree, and we got several good proposals, and we've got to choose one soon. I do think that we need to put pressure on the system to say, is it absolutely clear that it must take as long as it does? I mean, look at the time to doctorates and the whole other end of the spectrum. I've heard that described by people a lot more learned than I, people, Shirley Tillman from my old university, as scandalous. Well, all the way back down the trail, I think we have to ask ourselves questions like you're asking, like maybe the Europeans are asking, can we make this move faster? Another thing, at our school, I hope at yours, we are doing everything we can to persuade students and then enable students to use summer much more effectively. And our summer credit hours have gone up double digits the last 2 years. We've got a long way to go. But if we can, then our throughput, just to think of it as you might, will improve, and we will see more students moving through, maybe even engineering students, we'll see, in fewer than 4 years, and possibly on to a 3+2 type outcome.
One more question in the middle.
Tom Wolf, Michigan State University. My career in engineering is the result of an internship 40-some years ago, which was a component of the war on poverty. Today, I'm seeing an increasing number of politicians who oppose spending on literally everything. Not only has higher education been cut, as a civil engineer in my state, I've seen a road bill go down, even though the polls showed that people favored roads over taxes. And it extends to people not willing to fund the National Science Foundation, NASA, all the way down to Head Start. I'd like your views as a former politician as to where you draw these lines and your thoughts on those who are unwilling to invest in anything because it might cause some additional spending somewhere.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Tom. It's an important question. And both as a practitioner, which is behind me now, but from the responsibilities I have now, I think about it a lot. You're in a state which had the biggest road building program in recent American history, certainly in our state history, 10 consecutive years of record investments. Investments in infrastructure is an essential function of government, and I would hope people, wherever they are across the spectrum, could agree on that. Likewise for higher education. Now, what do those two things have in common? They are truly investments. That's a word that gets applied to a lot of things that aren't these days. What's the real problem, Tom? The real problem is, first of all, we are borrowing 30 cents of every dollar we spend, and it's going up, and it's going to go up much faster. Why are we doing that? You know, so when someone argues for more spending right now, I'm leaving aside the plain, visible, measurable ineffectiveness of so much government spending. That's one reason people don't want to do more of it. They have seen so much of it miserably spent. In our public service here, we were focused every day on making sure that every dollar was well spent. If you do that adequately, then people are more likely to support the spending the next dollar. A few months before our administration left office, the Manhattan Institute, I guess, commissioned a survey across the country and asked people how well or effectively or ineffectively do you think your state government is operating. 77% of Hoosiers, which was second to Montana, said it was effective. And I'm not even sure what they need government for in Montana, by the way, but anyway, we always thought that was really important because if people have confidence, they are willing, as you say, to support that next dollar spent. But the final point, and by far the biggest one, is this one. We have built a system in this country which is economically unsustainable, fiscally unsustainable, and frankly, morally unsustainable. We aren't spending, our federal government in particular, is spending money on today. It is borrowing money and spending it on consumption today at the expense of the future. It is grossly unfair to the young people of this country. We worry at our school and your school about student debt. Average student with debt this year has $30,000 of it. That's too much. Let's try to see it's not true tomorrow. But that same student has 6 times that already as her or his own share of the national debt we have stacked up for them. And until somebody steps up and addresses the completely unsustainable runaway cost of the so-called entitlements programs, they're now 70 cents of the federal dollar. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, disability, and so forth. All on autopilot. All consumption. All cross-subsidy from the young, the working population, to the elderly. It's not right, in addition to not being workable. So if you want to see money invested in the dollars that should be in the NSF, in higher education generally, in infrastructure and all these other things, then be among those citizens who recognizes that we've got to have, and we can do this, by the way, some common sense reforms of these programs that absolutely protect the most vulnerable, keep faith with people in the system or approaching the system in the next decade or so, but put us on a different trajectory for the future. So at least the dollars we borrow can be invested for the future and not dissipated on the present. Thanks a lot for having me here.
Thank you very much.